And I hate Vegas. I think Vegas combines everything I dislike about the United States in one place, 24/7.
Yeah, I love Vegas for like, I don't know, the first 5 hours, that you're there, and then you're like, oh, you just can't get out of there fast enough. And you're like, why did I even get a hotel room? Like, next time I'll just get a locker. How long have I been here? Get me out of here type thing. So I feel for you there. Have you ever been to Lake Powell?
I've never been. No. Where is that?
Okay. So here's my crystal ball tells me that Lake Powell is going to be like, probably not same scale as Tulum, but it's going to be like this new hipster spot. And I say that because I've been seeing and hearing so much about people like, during the pandemic going to Lake Powell, which is a great place to spend, for any reason, but especially during the conditions. And so it is actually, a perfect example of like, oh, like the big part of it's in Utah. And I think people sort of miss that. But it's like it feels like it's Mars. And it's this huge lake, and there's all sorts of different places. You rent a houseboat, you find a little, thing. You never see anybody else for a week. And you're like sort of living on Mars.
It's amazing. Well,
it's amazing. You got to go there sometime.
I will, no, for sure. I mean, just 2 days ago, I have had so many friends. I guess I'm friends with a lot of party animals, and then
Sure.
they can't stay that long without, and then Tulum now it's a free land. I've seen some videos, and it's crazy. I think, I was always thinking about, I've been to Tulum twice. I was like, how is that possible? Have you ever been?
I have. I've also been twice. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about it from like, I'm always very curious on how things work from a business standpoint. I've always operated that way as a kid. I think this is why I ended up in venture. But then it's like, how is it functional? Who pays for that? It's just like a little strip. But the whole thing outside of it is all, it's a poor Mexican village. So I definitely think, and then for the most part, they screw you over with credit cards. Everything's cash based. So there's no other explanation for me, but that's a great place for the cartels to launder money.
Totally.
I think, that's, I think, what makes Tulum work.
So we haven't talked about this.
No.
And you've literally just said my exact feeling. So my first experience in Tulum, it was probably like 2010, 2011. And you remember Gill Group?
Yes,
so there was,
of course. Yes.
Like Jet Setter was the sort of
luxury goods.
Yeah. It felt to me like the first flash sale, like private club vibe. It was free. You just didn't invite, whatever. But and then those businesses went on to just print money, and then also just kind of disappear a little bit, like Groupon. That we could talk all day about that. But anyway, so my wife at the time, girlfriend, had found like a Tulum jet setter deal, and she was like showing me pictures. She's like, "Oh my god, look at this place! It's amazing!" And like Tulum is actually off the grid, right? So like it's like, oh, you're like off the grid, and I think maybe she was, kind of caught up in the sort of allure of that as a marketing term, less, kind of thinking about it literally. And so, yeah, we got there and it was like, oh, like the guy, it was a New Yorker expat, like, he looked like Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, like blonde, curly hair surfer from New York.
Yes.
Bought this like mansion on the beach and turned it into bed and breakfast. And he's like, you cannot use your hair dryer, all this, that, and the other. And it was sort of like, why can't you do that? I'm like, babe, it's off the grid, but it's amazing. Like totally, like what is going on in Tulum to sustain, and like, how did this whole like hipster influencer thing happen? Was it staged? I have so many more questions than answers, unfortunately.
Yes,
for you,
well, I do,
about Tulum.
It's a great point. I do think that this is basically an Instagram mirage, where you just fly a bunch of very attractive women and they keep posting pictures, and then it kind of attracts everyone.
Yeah.
And it's I went there with a former girlfriend, and we stayed at this hotel. the nomad, and I remember having a little bit of a fight with her. I was like, "We're paying this for like a homeless thing? Like this? What is this tent in the middle of nowhere?" It's basically, I have no problem connecting with nature, but nature and God, they are available 24/7, and it can be free. You don't need to pay a premium for that.
Yeah, you don't have to go to Tulum, turns out. Yeah.
So it's nice and it is great. What annoyed me though is that given how I see my spiritual practices in the spiritual world, every time I see these things getting ultra commercialized, and it's not necessarily cheap. Every time like you ask me what's my favorite restaurant in the city of San Francisco, it's Orin Hummus, because it's consistent. It's the best return over equity that you can possibly find. The service is fantastic. The food is good, and it works for multiple occasions. It's not going to be a Michelin crazy thing. And the amount of money you spend on a regular dinner there, and it's not even the question is not about being able to afford it or not. You and I can pay those checks. That's not the problem. It's just what you get for it, because it's all sprinkled in this Instagram filter of like, oh, I'm going to be Zen and I smell the Palo Santo.
Totally. No, and that's why I vibe with you, Pedro, because you're a little bit of the contrarian too. Yeah. It's like, come on. Like I feel that way about a little bit about like the farm to table thing. There's times when I'm like, so I'm not, anti farm to table, but there are often times when it's like, oh, you have to check out this new, especially Denver, Boulder, right? You got to check out this new farm to table place. You go there, it's like, this is not good. It's just not good. And so you're paying twice the price, and everyone's like, there's like memes, right? I always imagine that those places are where like the memes where like people are like standing on their booth, like 3 people at once to take a picture of their meal. So I feel you. No, it's like, hey, like sometimes, but I appreciate that some people's definition or interpretation or opinion or whatever of best is wide open, right? So they can have those, but I'm with you, man. It's like, is it really?
Yeah.
The best.
It's interesting. It's interesting, and I think that these little parts of the world, they kind of pop up, and then they sustain themselves. It's New Year's Eve parties in Brazil are very similar in that way. So like 4 or 5 very wealthy entertainment groups or individuals will say, we're going to make that beach in the Northeast happen. And New Year's in Brazil is always a very big party. And it's kind of like there's the party.
Yeah, I was just thinking like, right? That's something I want to do before I die, by the way. I'll swap notes with you.
I will be more than happy to be a phenomenal mentor for you, your wife, family. Like you can have a lot of fun you can fly the kids, you can just go as a couple. Like there are just many, many different ways. And
how long would the flight be, by the way? You said you went 18 times from California. Like how long is that flight?
The fastest flight is connecting through Houston via United, and door to door is about 18 hours. From the minute you get into the Uber in the city of San Francisco all the way into your destination. So, but it's 18, 20 hours for you to be in Sao Paulo. Then you're going to have to fly up again to the northeast of the country, another, half a day probably, given check-in and logistics and so forth. So
worth it though. Sorry, I interrupted you. You're saying good, New Year's.
Well, no, they do the same thing. For instance, I spent my New Year's in this beach town in the northeast of Brazil called Carneiros, and that place is a complete Instagram flex. And what happened was that it's a very poor city, and the first night I spent, and I will admit it, this no problem at all. About like 15 days, COVID doesn't exist. I was partying and having fun, and didn't catch anything, thankfully, but. The first night there was a party. Second night, police comes in. They shut down the entire thing, but they shut down the city. The city has no infrastructure at all, in any way, shape, or form. So because they bring everything just for these parties, which it might have been how it was in the early days of Tulum. I think this the business concept of like how do you make a place happen, right, and make people want to go. It's fascinating
for sure. And Somebody's doing it pretty well in Tulum.
Yes.
Sounds like Brazil
Well,
too.
I suspect
Let's figure it out.
that it is the cartels because just how the payment mechanisms work there with the lack of connection and ATMs that can spill out US dollars in the
Great
middle of
cash
that,
businesses, yeah.
that strip. And, fighting the cartels is much, much hard. Like they're way better organized than the Taliban or ISIS, right? Or all the white supremacy stuff. Like they run legit business. I mean, it's very illegitimate, but like they got to get their shit together, and it's a combination of like business acumen with military, slash terrorist. It's not easy. I think it's horrible. I'm not saying that I'm pro, but if you think about it, in terms of like how are they organized as a business, it's very hard, very hard. So that's why they get shit together.
Totally. Well, if they weren't well organized, then we wouldn't be talking about them because they should not be around. So they're clearly doing something right, given that at the end of the day it is illicit activity, and yet they're extremely difficult to bring down. So
yes,
no, I hear you.
Imagine if instead of Eric Ries, the lean startup, you had the Escobar method.
Yeah, so, and it probably exists. It's just so closely held because it's the recipe book everybody wants. So
yes,
let's find it.